I've got Dustin Ashton here today to discuss Army design methodology. Hello, Dustin.
Hey, James, how you doing today?
I'm great. You are the first advanced course instructor I've had come participate in the podcast movement.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be here, sir.
Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about you, your background, where you're coming from?
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm a really young guy.
Yeah.
James is looking at me with my gray beard and everything going, no, you're not a young guy. Anyway, I spent 25 years in the United States Air Force and I was a pilot at that time, but I've always been extremely interested and captivated with education. And so instead of taking an airline pilot type of career path, I came down the education path, and it has led me. I retired from the Air Force in 2010. I first worked here at Fort Leavenworth at the Command and General Staff College in Department of Joint Interagency, and I can't even remember the rest of those things.
DJMO.
Yeah, that department for a couple of years, and then I taught knowledge management of all things for a year or so, and then I came over here, and I've been teaching the advanced course at AMSC for approximately 5 years now.
Now, Army design methodology, how is this relevant to leadership, leader development, or how we influence others and or improve the organization?
Well, thank you for asking. That's a great question, sir. The way I look at it now is that, we're going to go back in a minute, and we're going to talk about the types of problems that leaders are faced with, either being well-structured problems, medium-structured, or ill-structured problems.
So Army design methodology, or ADM, if we can just call it that for ease, is a way to approach problem solving.
It is. It is kind of it's a way to approach problem solving, but you'll see when we get talking about design some more that when the word solving might actually be too strong of a word. It's a way to approach problems, issues, actually. It's going to help us understand really complex things that are going on out there in the world, or complex issues. What we're really looking to do here is start a dialogue between a leader and a team, and to get a shared understanding of the environment, what's going on out in the environment, and how we might approach changing it.
If you were speaking, let's say, to your grandmother on the street, she says, Dustin, what is Army design methodology? How would you explain it to the layperson, just in a nutshell, where anybody could understand what it is?
Well, Grandma, I think Army design methodology is a way to approach a complex issue. If you've got something really hard that you're trying, that you just don't know what to do about it. Let's say you and Grandpa were having marriage problems, right? But you really didn't know what it was about. See, you could sit down with a counselor and Grandpa, and maybe you guys could sort of figure out at least an approach. It's a way that you could understand where you're coming from. It'll help you to visualize the issue as it stands out there, and then help you to describe it also.
Okay.
So that you at least have a way forward that perhaps has the most probability of working well for you.
How do leaders use this now out in the real world, in the Army?
Well, just like we're talking about, the issues that the Army is facing right now, the big issues are all very, very difficult. So let's call it the guns and bullets portion of the Army would be using it in order to figure out how they're going to wage their war, or coordinate their attacks, or what they're gonna do in Afghanistan, for example. Okay, that's a big messy problem, isn't it?
It is.
Yes.
Okay, so when we look at the profession of arms side of the Army, then is Army design methodology something that's employed at just the strategic level of war, or is it also used at operational and tactical level?
I'd say it's definitely more of a strategic type of tool. However, another thing that I've discovered about Army design methodology is its pure simplicity you can actually use it for practically any problem that you run into.
Is it something that requires a team or multiple people to use, or can I use ADM by myself in a vacuum in trying to better understand an environment or an issue?
Yeah, that's a good question too, James. I think that you can use that. You could do it by yourself. It's not designed that way, though. It's much, much better. It'll be a much more effective tool if you use it with a team of folks. Let's say 5, 10 at the most. Again, I mentioned before, well-structured problems and medium-structured problems. Those are things that perhaps are a little bit easier to solve. Where a well-structured, the problem is self-evident, and a medium-structured, professionals can easily agree on the structure of the problem. Those types of things, you would be using the Army problem-solving process, or perhaps then putting it into the military decision-making process in order to find solutions for that. But when we have an ill-structured problem, and what we're talking about when we get to ill-structured are things where professionals have difficulty agreeing on the problem structure, and will have a hard time agreeing on even what hypothesis to use. You don't know how you're going to approach it. You don't know how you're going to solve it. You don't even know necessarily what the end state of it will be, and or if you can get there.
I like the way that former TRADOC Commander General Perkins put it when he talked about this concept of complicated versus complex. Yes. So just because something is well structured or there's a knowable solution doesn't necessarily mean it's easy. He used the analogy of a pocket watch. Think of the old time pocket watch that the train conductor had in the 1800s. Yes. And it falls on the ground and all the gears and springs fall out. And now you've got a current state, broken pocket watch, desired end state, a functioning pocket watch. There is a knowable solution. Given enough time, you could figure it out to be a difficult task. It's complicated.
Correct.
Versus complex, where it's unknown, unknowable, and constantly changing. When we're talking about populations, there's a reason why we can't predict the weather a year from now. It is true complexity. Are there tools that we can use to try to understand that or to make better decisions? And he talked about that in pitching the Army's new operation concept when in a complex world, and really he wanted to describe what is complex. Yeah, that unknown, unknowable, constantly changing. So when we look at ill-structured problems, is that the same as complex?
I think we're definitely walking along the same path when we're talking about that.
Okay.
Complex with ill-structured, definitely hand in hand. And I think that really is what Army design methodology is designed to do, is help us, leaders and teams of professionals, to help us to cope with those situations that are very ambiguous, that we just can't find any structure to it, and at least figuring out a way forward. It gives us something productive to do, at least in the meantime. How's that?
And what would be the next step in discussing this topic?
Well, I think the next step is that there's just a few key words that you're going to hear a lot, I think, when you're talking Army design methodology. One of the key words is conceptual. We want to always stay really in the conceptual realm. That's hard for a lot of people to do, especially people who like to do concrete planning and have things be known. So again, we're talking about an ambiguous type of thing. We're talking about maintaining a certain level of conceptualness in it. You're going to find, hopefully, this is what you're going to find, is that you're using a lot of words, indefinite words, things like maybe or perhaps or might, and other descriptive words like imagine. What do you perceive, or what if this happens? Things like that. We should be kind of operating out there in the fluff a little bit, so to speak.
Okay, so when you say conceptual, then that'd be vice, detailed, linear.
Right.
Detailed planning. Okay, so we're the conceptual phase. It's a lot of ideas, brainstorming, throwing spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks, kind of stuff. And for some people, that can be uncomfortable.
Yes. For a great many people, it is uncomfortable. In order to win in a complex world, as General Perkins has suggested, we need to get people to be much more comfortable in operating in this realm. Mm-hmm. And this needs to really permeate, I think, throughout the entire Army. It can do nothing but help us, James, with some of the serious problems that we're facing out there. To get back to some of the other words, we're going to be challenging our assumptions. We hear that all the time, too. But this is going to be really, really true here. Is that you got to be really careful about any assumptions that you make. We're going to be concentrating on creating a shared understanding. We're going to be doing something that, well, you and I, we happen to be talking about this a while ago, is going between divergent and convergent thinking, or you might call it creative and critical thinking, where we want to really crunch down on an issue until we get kind of to what we'll call the sweet spot. There.
And let's clarify then what the difference between divergent and convergent. In the divergent stage, a diverging approach is going to be kind of red teaming or what ifing, or have you considered this? Well, yeah, maybe, but there's also this. Is that?
I like to think of it as more on the creative side. Correct. Divergent or going away from the center.
Yeah, this reminds me of also that time where this and this happened, and maybe there's a parallel, or there's a connection here between when that and that happened, or right, versus converging, and now we're bringing it together. We're trying to hone in on the fine points and the details.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, in convergent, I roughly would equate to critical thinking, if you will.
Where diverging is more of the creative part.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And what we want this to be, though, this isn't something where a leader comes in and says, "Hey, team, have I got a surprise for you? Here's a great issue for you to work on. Hey, I brought you in this little issue, world hunger. Here you go. Bam. Solve it. Come back to me with PowerPoint slides in a couple days, right?
Yeah, run it through a decision matrix and show me your course of action.
And leader runs out of the room, goes back to his office and props up his feet and starts drinking coffee and says, "Hey, I did that really well, didn't I?" No, that's not what it's about. It is about leader coming in the room, grabbing a dry erase marker, going to the whiteboard with you, and let's nub this out. Let's work together. We're gonna all talk about this, and we're gonna really crank out some stuff.
So a good leader is gonna have a facilitated role in an Army design methodology environment.
A good leader will be there with the team, on the team, a member of the team. Affirmative.
How do I know, though, when a situation calls for ADM versus just running it through a deck mat?
I think that it just goes back to the type of problem that you have, or the type of issue that you're facing.
But sometimes I just intuitively feel like I know what the issue is.
Well, this is where we got to be careful now, too. Okay, so yeah, you're definitely running this along a fine line here. It's going to be hard to tell. All right, you can always try one, and then if it doesn't work, try the other. But I would recommend personally start at the higher level, because it's not going to hurt. It's not going to hurt to run something through Army design methodology. It'll never hurt to do that. It can only help. And then that would help to guide your more detailed planning later on down the road.
As you guys teach ADM in the advanced course, the scenario I think that you guys use is managing talent. Is it, or how do we manage talent in the Army civilian workforce?
Well, not quite. It's how should the Army shape the future civilian workforce for the Army of 2040, and then we ask each team to look at it through one of four lenses. I might not be able to remember all four of them right now, but one of those is talent management, one is leader development, one is supervisor employee engagement, and the fourth one I always forget because nobody ever chooses it.
Okay.
Life cycle management. That's it.
Life cycle management.
Yeah. So you're supposed to look at that question that I asked through one of those four lenses.
Okay. And going back to my premise of having an intuitive solution for a problem. So let's say I was assigned, or I decided to tackle talent management. I'll tell you the problem right now, USA jobs. We fix that. We get that straight. Then we fix our talent management issue. There you go, boss. Done.
Yeah. Well, I would say that you need to take a larger view of the system.
I can't be the first one, though, to have suggested an intuitive.
Absolutely, you would not be the first one to think that one piece of a puzzle or one piece of a system is what the issue is. Thank you for leading me along this line, because yeah, we do need to talk about systems thinking if we're talking about Army design methodology. And so, you think of the simplest system that there is. Okay, there's an input into the system. There's the system itself that's inside a box, if you will. But the box is never a closed box. It's permeated, right? So things can get in and out of that system, also that maybe you're not accounting for. And then there's an output, and then there's some sort of feedback loop back to the input. So that's a very simple system. But what we are dealing with here are systems of systems, and then looking at how the various systems affect each other. So you can think of one of the easiest ways to think about it is like with the human body. All right, you have a circulatory system, includes your heart and your arteries and your veins and all that kind of stuff. And you have a nervous system with your brain and your nerves and all that kind of stuff. But then how does one affect the other? Really, neither can live without the other one, right? But the effects that they have on each other can be tremendous.
So how much of ADM is just trying to identify the systems in a given situation or given environment?
Well, that's really the first part of it. See, and we've been talking all this time, and we haven't even cracked open Army design methodology at all yet, but we're almost there. Can you believe it? How much of it is just identifying the systems? Probably all on the top portion, or in the environmental frame, is really where we're talking about the systems most of all.
Okay, so you mentioned then we haven't even scratched the surface yet of what Army design methodology really is, and we've been yammering on here for 20 minutes. All right, so what is it then? What is the meat and potatoes of ADM?
Well, I'm so glad you asked, James.
I can tell you are.
And I'll tell you what, I love Army design methodology. This is a great thing, I'm telling you. And it's so simple here that you can condense it down into one small slide. You can just get on a whiteboard or something. You can draw it out very, very simply. Okay, and so let me try to describe it to you. All right, so imagine, if you will, a quad slide, right, or a quad chart. So that you have a upper left corner, upper right, bottom left, and bottom right corner.
Yeah, as implied by the term quad chart.
Okay, well, maybe I went a little too far into that, but yeah, okay. So, but the whole top of this thing is what we call the environmental frame. There's 3 frames, by the way. 3 frames in Army design methodology. The entire top floor of that is the environmental frame. The bottom left is what we call the problem frame. And then the bottom right, is called the operational approach frame. However, when you go back up to that top floor here, and we're talking about the environmental frame, that is essentially split into 2 parts. And the two parts of that are called current state, is on the top left, and on the top right is the desired end state. Let me just start on these one piece at a time, if I can. So let's go to the top left and talk about current state. And this is really about what is going on in the environment. So you have, your area or your environment, wherever you're operating in. And that can be described essentially as a system or a system of systems. So what is going on there? You find a way to describe that. The Army gives you some tools. Some people might have heard of PMISI PT or .mil-PF or MET-TC or SWAT, or I'm throwing out a bunch of acronyms right now, whatever. But any way that you can find of describing the current state. But what you're going to do with that current state is you're going to narrow it down, and you're going to put that into what we call a graphic and a narrative.
And by graphic, you mean I'm going to draw pretty pictures?
Yes.
How is that going to help? Is this going to be circles and arrows?
It can be anything that you want it to be. Okay, so this is a way to tap into the creative side of yourself, and it's going to help you to visualize. It's going to help your brain to make that transition over to a more visual adaptation of what the operational environment current state looks like. So, but what we have here then, okay, is the graphic and the narrative. The graphic, okay, it doesn't have to be, just a silly little picture or something like that. But what it must be is the two must support each other, the graphic and the narrative. So you should be able to put up the graphic, and it's pretty much self-evident what the narrative says, or you should be able to read the narrative, and it pretty much perfectly describes what the graphic looks like.
Okay.
They just have to describe each other. They have to be supportive of each other.
Well, if you get that picture right, it's worth 1,000 words.
Yes. The picture is worth 1,000 words. That's a great way of putting it.
Usually, what do you see, though, as far as graphics? As an advanced course instructor, you've seen a lot of examples. Just could you basically describe what you typically see that helps people describe the current state?
Yeah, usually it's some sort of a graphical representation of what the issue looks like. Maybe using word art or various pictures of the way things do. Oh yeah, well, I guess one kind of pops into my brain about if you're thinking of the current Army and what the talent management system looks like. So for example, maybe it looks like a machine. You can call it the talent management machine, and it's got various parts to it, like a conveyor belt, and something that puts the things onto the conveyor belt, and somebody working on things on the conveyor belt. Something like that. That would be a visual representation.
Okay.
And then the other side of the environmental frame then is the desired end state, and this is very, very important word in that is that word desired. This is not predicted. It's got nothing to do with a prediction of the future or if we maintain exactly what we're doing right now, then what's it going to look like 20 years down the road, say? Something like that. But what this is really your true wish of the greatest future that you can think of, like a utopian future or the perfect world future that you're looking for. It's the state that you want it to be. So this is the Army, for example, getting all the smartest people out of all the universities all across the country.
Agile, adaptive, critical, creative thinkers who can win in a complex world.
Yes, the perfect people. And they automatically go, hey, I'm going to the Army. I'm going to be an Army civilian, right? Okay.
So we've
ahead.
talked about a best case scenario though, but our own prejudices and biases are going to come into this, are they not?
Yes.
Unless I've got Dustin standing there with the ladder of inference poster tapping it.
Yes. Yeah. So the best case scenario of what you would want in as a solution to your issue.
Okay. So we describe the current state the best we can. And that's going to take multiple inputs from people because everybody's going to have a different perspective. And no one person's point of view is purely objective. And
guess what? It's always changing too.
Yes.
Yeah. But if you can actually nail down that desired end state, then you got something. Now, I mentioned an environmental frame, a framework. So what you really want to do here is use the same environmental framework that you had on the current state and use that also on the desired end state, because at this point, then you're going to want to compare the two.
And that's where we do our gap analysis at that point.
Correct. So it's kind of like a gap analysis, and what you're looking for here is to find obstacles, if you will, or find what is prohibiting you from getting from your current state to your desired end state. And that would be actually more of an obstacle vice a gap. It could be a gap, but it's something that's getting in the way of reaching your desired end state. And what that does right there is that identifies your problem.
Okay. Are the problem statements different that come out of ADM versus those that come out of the regular Army problem-solving process when we're dealing with well-structured problems? For instance, a well-structured problem, to determine the best vehicle for our recruiting station, and given our criteria, it has to be American-made under a certain amount of money, and it's a pretty well-structured problem. Run it through a decision matrix, come out with the best course of action. But I get it, like a 1 or 2 sentence problem statement. How do these problem statements manifest after a session of ADM?
Number one is with Army design methodology, we're not going to have a problem statement. What we have is a problem narrative, and which is different from a problem statement.
How's a problem narrative different?
That's what it is doing there. The narrative is describing what is preventing you from getting to the desired end state, or therefore the obstacles. It's describing that in words, and then the graphic is going to be a graphic representation of whatever those obstacles are.
Okay.
And what we do there is you call that, that essentially is the problem. Here's an issue with Army design methodologies that we're kind of hardwired and pre-programmed that we always think we know what the problem is automatically.
It's USA Jobs.
Yeah, just like you were talking about. Yep, it's USA Jobs. That's the problem, right? Well, you got to fight against yourself all the way through the environmental frame to keep from allowing your preconceived notions of what you think the problem is from entering your mind. If you're successful at doing that, the better off you're going to be in Army design, because you have no clue what the problem is or what the problem might be. Remember, I talk about conceptual words here, what the problem might be, until you get down to this bottom left quadrant, as I was talking about. Okay. Now we know what the problem might be.
When I think of framing, I think of the context that we provided in, and I can actually be misleading or deceptive in how I put it in a certain context. How I frame it could determine whether it's well-structured, medium-structured, or ill-structured as well. To use an example, in the intermediate course, we use the college problem. We've got college A, B, C, D, and E, and each one's different. Which college should we send our kid to? And if you frame the problem statement such as, to determine the cheapest college, to determine the best college to send our kid to, then it's pretty easy to run that through decision matrix given a set of criteria. But if we were to frame it in a way of the best learning institution to develop juniors' influential abilities to be a world leader and create world peace and radically reduce world hunger. How I frame it now, I've just made it ill-structured at that point. I don't know. It's unknowable what influences a particular college is going to have that would push a person in that direction. A point I try to make with my students too is when we start dealing with populations and people, I can't think of a case where it's still well-structured. We're automatically medium-structured, if not always in an ill-structured or complex situation when we're talking about trying to influence people and populations. Would you agree?
I totally agree with you on that. That anytime you're dealing with people, it's going to be complex. Yes, sir.
Moving to the fourth quadrant in the lower right,
Yes.
the operational approach.
So now we're going to find out how we can get from the current state to our desired end state. Or in other words, how are we going to get over, under, around, through, whatever? How are we going to deal with that obstacle that's keeping us from getting from the current state to the desired end state?
Okay.
And you're going to describe this once again with a graphic and a narrative. So you're going to have a narrative that'll describe saying, okay, in order to get from where we are today to where we want to be in the future, this is what we're going to do, okay? And then we're going to have a graphic that represents that.
After that, am I done?
Yes.
Yes.
No, almost, James. I don't call you Jim. That doesn't work, does it?
Call me whatever you want.
Okay. Mr. Cameron, sir, you are done with Army design methodology. However, now all you have is an operational approach, but this is what essentially feeds your problem-solving process. So now you have things like a commander's intent, you might call it if you're military-ish, or a operational approach, or a way forward, or you have some things that are going to help your staff now do some more detailed planning on what you have come up with conceptually.
Okay, so if I'm on a military staff, is Army design methodology going to precede MDMP?
That is correct.
Or does it sometimes happen in conjunction with MDMP?
It should happen prior to it. It's not required all the time, though, of course, because you could enter MDMP or the decision-making process based upon the type of issue that you're dealing with. But if it is an ill-structured problem, you definitely should take the route of Army design methodology.
Or if from the civilian side, we're looking at going into the Army problem-solving process, then so this should precede that to help us better understand the situation and its context before we start going into any sort of problem-solving methodologies.
That is correct. Now, before we finish here, talking about my favorite subject, Army design methodology, let me give you just a couple pointers about if you're going to go out there and, now you're going to rush out and you're going to say, hey, I want to do Army design. I'm going to be on a design team. Well, here's some things.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I know that's what you're going to do. We're going to start solving the problems of the universe right after this. So, but if you want to participate on a design thing, some things that are useful for you to think about and consider as you go in is that you need to have some sort of comfort working with ambiguity. If you don't have that sort of comfort, you're not going to be very comfortable working on a design team. It's going to kind of drive you batty, right? You're going to want to keep an open mind. You want to discuss alternatives early. Always, as you're going through this, you want to be looking for relationships between things that are obvious or not obvious, especially among systems or systems of systems. Always thinking along the lines of how you're going to want to present this graphically or pictorially. You can, even use simple ways or start simple and then make it more complicated as time goes on. And you don't want to keep questions to yourself as you're working on a design team. Always looking to reevaluate the environment as time goes on. be willing to slow down and think as you're working on this. And for more information on Army design methodology, make sure you reference ATP 5-0.1 Army Design Methodology, published by the United States Army in July of 2015.